Hello, I'm Tessa Spencer, an archivist in the Outreach and Learning Department at the National Records of Scotland, or NRS. This talk will provide an introduction to NRS's archives, where you can access church records, civil and criminal court cases, exchequer records, property records, tax records, the archives of landed estates, and more. My talk will look at this diverse material, including some interesting and surprising examples, explaining what the records are and how you can access and use them for historical research. But first, a brief introduction to NRS. Who are we? Where are we? And what do we do and hold? NRS is a non-ministerial department of the Scottish Government and was established on the 1st of April 2011, following the merger of the National Archives of Scotland and the General Register Office for Scotland. We have a duty to collect, preserve and produce information about Scotland's people and history and make it available to inform current and future generations. Before records were officially stored in the archive, there was no permanent accommodation for Scotland's national records. For hundreds of years, they were stored in various locations, including a place you may have visited, Edinburgh Castle. The accommodation was far from satisfactory, and the archives were damaged by damp and vermin. In 1765, a grant of £12,000 was obtained by Lord Frederick Campbell, the Lord Clerk Register, from the forfeited Jacobite estates towards building a proper repository. This proper repository would become General Register House. Designed by Robert Adam, it is one of his finest public buildings. It's also the first purpose-built public record repository in the British Isles and is one of the oldest archive buildings in the world, still being used for its original purpose. The foundation stone was laid in 1774 and it opened to the public in 1789. It cost in total £29,000 to build, which was worth approximately over £2.5 million in 2017, according to the National Archives currency converter. This plan is from a volume of plans for alterations and additions to the building of General Register House, Kirk, 1772. NRS's collections are housed in 4 buildings in Edinburgh, 3 of which are in the New Town: General Register House, New Register House and West Register House. The 4th, Thomas Thompson House, a modern purpose-built repository, can be found to the west of the city. NRS holds around 80 kilometres, 49.7 miles of records, which are stored in secure and temperature-controlled rooms. The records span from the 12th to the 21st centuries, touching on virtually every aspect of Scottish life. We are responsible for the public and legal records of Scotland, but we also have many local and private archives. They relate to a variety of subjects, including the church, law, government, and everyday life. We hold and make available one of the most varied archive collections of records in Britain. I will now provide examples of some of the records held by NRS, explaining what they are and how they can be used for research purposes. NRS holds records created by the Scottish Government from the 12th century to the present day, as well as records of the Scottish census and post-1855 civil registration system, the statutory registers of births, deaths and marriages. The records of the Scottish Government include those of the Exchequer, one of the earliest government departments that developed out of the King's Chamber. This was the branch of the King's household which was responsible for the royal finances. The accounts of King James V's pantry, kitchen, buttery and cellars for the years 1525 to 1539 survive in 8 large household books. These books note the daily record of provisions received and expended, with additional accounts for wines, spices and food for the livestock. One particular volume, covering the year 1534 to 1535, is distinguished from the others by the drawings which decorate a number of its pages. This particular page depicts a Tudor rose, a thistle, a unicorn and the Roman heroine Lucretia. The significance of these symbols is explained in an article in the NRS's blog, Open Book, Doors Open Days, the Court Doodler. Scotland's Places is a free resource where you can search for records by place name. It draws from the collections held by Historic Environment Scotland, the National Library of Scotland and NRS, so you can find maps, surveys, plans and drawings, photographs, archaeological records, taxation records, Ordnance Survey namebooks and publications about places of interest. 271 of our historical tax volumes from the Exchequer records are freely available to consult and download via the Scotland's Places website. You can also consult digital images in the historical search room at NRS. The tax records relate to carriage, cart, clock and watch, dog, farm horse, hearth, horse, inhabited home, land, male and female servant, poll, shop and window tax. Poll tax records date from the last decade of the 17th century, a time of foreign wars, economic troubles, famine and poor weather. Poll taxes were imposed in 1694, 1695 and twice in 1698 in order to pay for the Scottish Army and Navy. Payment was graduated at the rate of 6 shillings and upwards according to rank and means. Only the poor and children under 16 were exempt. The collectors of the poll tax face difficulties in collecting it and the records are incomplete. Arranged by county and parish, the amount of information given varies from list to list. However, they provide a valuable resource for social and family history. This page from the poll tax records for Edinburgh, Canongate and Leith provides the names of the poll tax payers for the parish of College, Kirk in 1694. It also gives the occupations of most of the persons named. The Ordnance Survey namebooks are a collection of over 1,000 volumes that were compiled in the middle of the 19th century. They contain brief architectural descriptions of properties featured in the 6-inch and 25-inch Ordnance Survey maps. They are available to consult on Scotland's Places and can also be viewed at NRS. These records contain every place name that appeared on Victorian maps of Scotland and were created by the Ordnance Survey's field surveyors as they mapped Scotland from the 1840s until 1878, when they completed their work on Orkney and Shetland. The surveyors recorded information about the names of every natural feature and man-made structure that was to appear on the maps, relying on knowledgeable locals to supply them with accurate names. The surveyors added notes from printed histories, gazetteers, directories and dictionaries, making the namebooks a snapshot of the landscapes and townscapes of Scotland. In this example, from the Aberdeenshire Ordnance Survey namebooks, we can see the entry for the site of a stone circle at Chapel of Garrioch, including a beautiful illustration of the Maiden Stone. The Inland Revenue Scotland IRS survey of land values and ownership took place between 1910 and 1915. This massive survey recorded information on 99.7% of all land in Scotland. These records have more potential for research than is currently realised and can offer excellent insights into the Scottish rural and urban landscapes at that time. They contain historical facts as well as anecdotes about local areas and social communities across Scotland. The field books and associated plans have been imaged and are available to consult at NRS. Surveyors often commented on the historic value of certain sites and how this affected their overall value. Linlithgow Palace, as we can see in this example, was estimated rather nonchalantly to have an historical value of, say, £10,000. Information on buildings now demolished can also be recovered through these records. St Andrew's Hall's Theatre in Glasgow, which was heavily damaged by fire in 1962, is recorded along with a sketch street plan. The responsibility of drafting treaties, credentials for envoys, the King's letters to foreign rulers, and other diplomatic documents was down to the Royal Secretary and his officers. Not many of these records have survived from the Scottish Secretariat, and much that does was once in private hands. It appears that many of the Scottish secretaries were tempted to retain the papers as their private property, and in contrast to England, no attempt was made to recover these papers after the secretary had resigned or died. Due to this reason, the State Paper Series held at NRS is the result of a random accumulation or a conscious selection. Some documents and letterbooks, such as the Declaration of Arbroath from 1320, the earliest letter of Mary Queen of Scots from 1550, and the exemplification of the Act of Union from 1707, have found their way back into the National Archives. Others, like the letters of Mary Queen of Scots to the Earl of Castles, are preserved in private papers in NRS, the National Library of Scotland, and elsewhere. The Declaration of Arbroath is foremost amongst Scotland's state papers and the most famous historical record held by NRS. It is a letter from the barons and freeholders and the whole community of the Kingdom of Scotland to Pope John the 22nd, dated at Arbroath the 6th of April 1320. Selected state papers have been digitised and can be consulted at NRS. Images are also available to purchase from the Image Library on the ScotlandsPeople website. ScotlandsPeople is the official Scottish Government resource where you can access digital images of statutory registers of births, deaths and marriages, the census, old parish registers, legal records and more. Once you have registered an account on the site, you can search the indexes for free and pay to view the images. The statutory registers are official records of births, deaths and marriages. They have been kept in Scotland from 1855 onwards, when compulsory civil registration was introduced to replace a system overseen by the Church of Scotland, the established church. In more recent years, registers of divorces, dissolutions and civil partnerships have also been kept. The registers can be searched by personal name, but some modern records are closed to protect the privacy of individuals. The statutory registers of marriages also include some famous names, such as Agatha Christie, the Queen of Crime, a prolific writer of murder mystery stories featuring the Belgian detective Hercule Poirot or the English Miss Marple. Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller or Christie married Max Edgar Lucien Malawan on the 11th of September 1930. The entry in the Statutory Register of Marriages for the district of St Giles in Edinburgh gives the place of marriage as St Cuthbert's Church. The entry also shows that she had obtained a decree of divorce from her first husband, Colonel Archibald Christie. Her usual residence was 22 Cresswell Place in London, but she was living at the Broadford Hotel in Strath at the time of this marriage. David Clark Russell was a rivet catcher on the Forth Bridge construction. David would have been stationed near the joints to be riveted where a furnace would have been set up. A rivet warmer would have heated up the rivets until they were more malleable and then removed them with tongs and thrown them to the catcher, who would catch them in an ash-lined leather or wooden bucket. Sadly, David died aged 13 during the course of his employment on the bridge and appears to be the youngest casualty of the 73 men known to have died. David died on the 13th of September 1888 on part of the Forth Bridge on the island of Inchgarvie, Dunfermline. His cause of death is given: fracture of base of skull and of spinal column, fracture of both legs, death instantaneous. The Register of Corrected Entries, or RCE, records additional authorised information about the death following registration. This usually means further details about cause of death in cases of sudden, accidental and violent deaths. An RCE reference is inserted beside the original entry in the Statutory Register of Deaths. Linked to David's death entry is an RCE which gives more details regarding his death. He fell from staging on the Forth Bridge construction, a distance of about 180 feet, 54.8 metres, and was killed instantly. An official census of the Scottish population has been taken every 10 years since 1801, with the exception of 1941 during the Second World War. However, little information about individuals has survived for 1801 to 1831. From 1841 to 1911, enumerators prepared transcript books after the collection of household schedules from the head of every dwelling, institution and vessel. Census returns are lists of people living at each address, giving ages, places of birth and other information about them. In 1901, Charles R. Mackintosh, 32, architect and employer, was at 120 Main Street with his wife Margaret, an artist, who worked from home. The census return for the district of Blythswood in Glasgow shows that the household included a visitor, Harry C. Marillier, a metal worker who was born in the Cape of Good Hope, and a servant, Maggie MacDonald, who spoke Gaelic and English. On Scotland's People, you can search the registers of the Church of Scotland, some other Presbyterian churches, as well as the Roman Catholic Church in Scotland. The Old Parish Registers, or OPRs, comprise the records of births and baptisms, banns and marriages, and deaths and burials, kept by the individual parishes of the Church of Scotland before the introduction of civil registration in 1855. The parish minister, or session clerk, normally assumed responsibility for maintaining these registers, but since there was no standard format employed, record keeping varied enormously from parish to parish and also from year to year. As a result, the information may be sparse, unreliable, and difficult to read. In the Dunning OPR in 1764, it is noted, "Any person that wants a child's name in any of the 3 preceding pages may scarcely expect to find it in the proper place, they being wrote by Mr. King, late schoolmaster to Bute here, without any regularity or order." And in a different handwriting and ink, "The above ill-natured ungentlemanlike observation was written by Mr. James White, and stands as one mark of his own distinguished idiotism." The oldest register dates from 1553, baptisms and banns from Errol, Perthshire, and the earliest record is for Christine or Christine Hay, who was baptised on the 27th of December 1553. Although there was a requirement from 1552 that parishes record baptisms and marriages, many did not commence until much later, and some more remote areas only have registers from the early 19th century. Some registers have been lost or destroyed, and the condition of the surviving 3,500 is variable. In this example, the minister cannot recall all the details for a child who was baptised in Ochiltree. Something George, something lawful son, to what you call him, in Mains of Bar Skimming, was baptised April the 9th, 1704. Thankfully, other entries are more illuminating, such as the baptismal record for James Clerk Maxwell, one of the 19th century's greatest scientists. On ScotlandsPeople, you can also search for records that are not indexed by personal name, most notably the church court records using the virtual volume search. You can navigate to this page by clicking on the New Search for Kirk Session and Other Church Court Records featured block on the home page, or via the Search Our Records page. In virtual volumes, there are more than 1 million pages from around 6,000 volumes from the courts of the Church of Scotland. If you are registered with the website, you can search the records and then browse through the images on the site at no charge. You can also save or download a copy for a small fee. A new system was introduced to run church affairs, education and poor relief following the Scottish Reformation in 1560. The Church, the General Assembly, synods, presbyteries and Kirk sessions. The records created by church courts are very useful for family and local history research. They contain details of key events in communities across Scotland, mostly in the form in evidence in church court cases, offering a vivid snapshot into the everyday lives of ordinary Scots. In this period, cases could involve paternity of children and irregular marriages, and the church also carried out many functions later taken over by local government. These included school education and poor relief, registering births, deaths and marriages, and disciplining parishioners for what would now be termed antisocial behaviour, such as drunkenness, cursing or breaking the Sabbath. The records also show that in an age of private healthcare, the ministers and sessions sometimes paid medical bills for the poor. There are also accounts of exceptional events, such as witchcraft trials, outbreaks of epidemics, crop failures, extreme weather events, and the civil wars. For family historians, these records are often the first step away from sources such as registers of births and census returns, which are not indexed intensively by personal names. The records can give details of births, marriages, burials, and the movement of people from one part of Scotland to another. Evidence given in Kirk session and presbytery cases can give fascinating details of how our ancestors lived, worked, and worshipped. Of most interest for genealogists and local historians are the minutes of the Kirk sessions, which typically contain a detailed and often colourful record of the discipline the minister and Kirk elders handed out to errant parishioners for offences such as drunkenness, swearing, breaking the Sabbath, quarrelling and sexual misdemeanours. Mortling Kirk session minutes record an accusation of drunkenness on the Sabbath in early 1675. This was levelled at 3 young men in the parish and took several months to reach a conclusion. John Campbell had passed 3 men, George Campbell, John Miller and Mungo Gibb, begging for money to pay for an evening of drinking, and gave the men a merk. In the early hours of the Sabbath, the 3 men knocked on John's door, and Mungo assaulted John. The minute book records that George Campbell, John Miller, and Mungo Gibb, being convicted of drunkenness and Sabbath breaking, are appointed to be rebuked publicly the next Sabbath. As punishment, the men were to stand on the stool of repentance and receive admonishment by the minister. When the time came for the men to accept their punishment, they showed contempt of court by deliberately breaking the stool of repentance and were excommunicated. Following the Reformation, the religious hospitals associated with the monasteries were largely abandoned, and the reformed Kirk was concerned about the poor from both a religious and moral sense. The first book of discipline declared that each parish should care for its own poor, at least those such as widows, the elderly, and those whose age or disabilities left them unfit to work. Kirk sessions were also responsible for supporting abandoned babies, sometimes recorded as exposed within the records. Factors such as the shame of conceiving out of wedlock and the harsh realities of poverty meant that many illegitimate children were left to be brought up by the parish. The demand for financial support at times resulted in a lack of poor relief funds, and the Kirk session were often anxious to locate the parents, as much for the child's sake as for monetary reasons. On the 24th of December 1721, Inverurie Kirk session minutes record that an orphan was found exposed. The following day, a search for the mother was to be undertaken, and all who may be supposed to have child, it will give ground to suspect them as guilty, in regards such as innocent, will look on it as a privilege to be searched, that their innocence may appear. NRS holds the records of the Scottish Courts of Law, including the Court of Session, High Court of Justiciary, Sheriff Courts and Commissary Courts, and legal registers associated with them, such as registers of deeds and Sasines, which record the transfer of property or land in Scotland. These records contain a wealth of information relating to people and places in Scotland, and have been described as a treasure trove of anecdote and incident. These records can be consulted in the Historical Search Room at NRS. It is an irony of ancestor hunting that you are more likely to find information about an individual who committed a crime than one who was a respectable, law-abiding citizen. Criminal records can unveil fascinating stories about people, many of which are often quite grim or sad. This information may be found in records of the investigation into the case, records of the various criminal courts, and in prison records. Precognitions are pre-trial papers and form part of the records of the Lord Advocate's Department and include witnesses' evidence about the alleged crime. This evidence includes a wealth of incidental detail, and in these records you can almost hear people speaking. These records are indexed and therefore provide a way into the records of the trial itself. This is an example of a precognition record relating to the death of a chimney sweep's boy in Glasgow in 1840. It is the evidence of James Fleming, apprentice builder, providing information about the death of the boy and the property where the boy died. Sometimes it is possible to find out more about children born to an unnamed father in actions before a sheriff court to order the father to contribute to the maintenance of the child. An interesting example is the case of Anne Lindsay, born in Johnston, Renfrewshire on the 27th of October 1880. Her birth entry recorded her mother as Mary Ann Lindsay, yet her father's details were left blank. Mary Ann knew that the father of her baby was the son of her previous employer, William Steele Jr., a student at Glasgow University where he was studying for the ministry. The previous year, the couple had enjoyed a brief period of courtship. William had sent Mary Ann a festive note in December 1879, and later a pretty Valentine card expressing his love for her. By the time Anne was born, the relationship had turned sour, and William refused to admit that he was the father. Mary Ann sought a decision from Paisley Sheriff Court, using letters and the Valentine card as evidence of an honourable courtship with a view to marriage. On the 19th of July, 1881, the sheriff found against William, stating, "I cannot come to any other conclusion that the defender is the father of the pursuer's child." He awarded Mary Ann court expenses and the money she had claimed for the birth and maintenance of the child. William appealed to the Court of Session, but the verdict was upheld. he was ordered to pay Mary Ann a total of £5, 6 shillings and 1 pence. As in similar cases, the father's identity was recorded in the Register of Corrected Entries. An instrument to Sasine is a legal document that records the transfer of ownership, usually a sale or an inheritance, of a piece of land or of a building. The origin of the term Sasine is the same as the word seize, meaning to take possession of. It will normally detail the names of the new and previous owners and will give basic description of the property transferred. It does not include the names of tenants, and it is a record of transfers rather than of the status quo at any given time. The full register begins from 1617 and runs until the present day. This is an example from the first volume of the Register of Sasine and shows the signature of the Clerk Register on the flyleaf. Digital images of the Register of Sasines can be consulted at NRS. It is possible to search for transactions relating to a particular property from 1781 to 1989 using the RAC Search Tool in the Historical Search Room at NRS. This tool allows searching of the digitised Sasine indexes and the related abridgments and their indexes. The abridgments contain summaries of all the documents recorded in the Register of Sasines from 1781, chronologically within counties. Alternatively, it is worth considering spending some money on a shortcut. Since 1876, the government has maintained a series of search sheets for property in Scotland. These identify the volume and page numbers of all the Sasines and deeds for a given building or piece of land, and can be used as a starting point for searching back in time. Copies of the search sheets for particular properties can be purchased from Registers of Scotland in Edinburgh. The Register of Deeds is a very rich source for all kinds of legal records. Contracts, indentures, nominations of trustees to a will, powers of attorney, and all manners of legal instruments are recorded for security of parties being able to enforce the document in the Court of Session or an inferior court. They are digitised for the years 1812 to 1910. Prior to this date, you will need to consult indexes and minute books in order to trace a deed of interest. Deeds include testamentary dispositions, especially those involving heritable property. After the death of Colin MacFarquhar, co-partner of Andrew Bell in Encyclopaedia Britannica, the settlement of his estate was recorded in the Register of Deeds in 1793. This is an extract from the first page of his trust deed and settlement. It includes provision for his widow from the profits of the Encyclopaedia Britannica. MacFarquhar's will related to his heritable property as well as his movable goods, so it could not be recorded in the commissary court. Before 1868, wills could transfer only movable property, so money, clothes, household goods, etc., while land and buildings could be inherited either by the separate retool or services of heirs procedure, or by the mechanism of a trust disposition and settlement, as in this case. Wills and testaments can be found in the records of the commissary and sheriff courts. Wills can often provide a wealth of detail about family relationships and a vivid snapshot into the past about how people lived. The inventory of Adam Smith's personal estate from 1816 gives a detailed description of the rooms and contents of his house from the attic to the kitchen. This page describes 7 tables in his drawing room. You may find names of family members, their relationships, and details of everyday possessions, as well as details of the debts that they owed at the time of their death. Robert Burns's testament is not a will in a popular sense, but a testament dative, whereby his widow applied to the commissary court to recover 2 outstanding debts owing to her husband, for which she required legal authority. The sole purpose of the testament was to confirm Jean as her late husband's executor, as he had not made a will before he died, and this enabled her to recover the debts. You can search over 611,000 wills and testaments using the ScotlandsPeople service and the online resources in the Historical Search Room, covering the period 1513 to 1925. Records from 1926 to 1999 are available to consult at NRS. Testaments recorded from 2000 onwards are not held by NRS. Instead, you should contact the Commissary Department at Edinburgh Sheriff Court. NRS holds valuation rolls, records of some boroughs, county councils, justices of the peace and other local authorities. Valuation rolls are records of property ownership compiled for the collecting taxman. From 1855 they record properties, apart from those with a very low rental value, listing annually the names of the proprietor, tenant and principal occupier, and the annual rateable value of the property listed. These records can sometimes be a useful aid to finding a family if they are not readily found in a census, because the indexed entries cover inter-census years and beyond. You can also use them to search the history of buildings such as shops and businesses of all kinds, churches, schools, hospitals, railway stations, and even lighthouses. The valuation rolls from 1855-1856 to 1957-58 have all been digitised and are available to consult at NRS together with an index. Indexes and images of valuation rolls for selected years are also available to consult via ScotlandsPeople. A tattoo specialist calling himself Prince Valler is the most unusual person we have found in the valuation rolls. He is unique in being listed as a tattooer, a professional tattooist, working from a rented flat at 63 Stewart Street in the East End of Glasgow in 1925. His flat was modest, with a rateable value of £11 15 shillings. He later ran his business from a shop in Glasgow. You can read more about this pioneering tattooist in a feature on the ScotlandsPeople website. NRS's Gifts and Deposits series, or GD, include the family and estate papers of landowners from all over Scotland, as well as the records of businesses, societies, hospitals, charitable schools and institutions. The oldest record held by NRS is a private record, a breve by King David I to the Church of St Cuthbert, dated 1127, from the papers of the Mull family, Earls of Dalhousie. A breve is the original instruction from which a royal charter could be created. The charter, when it was drawn up, gave a legal grant of land beneath Edinburgh Castle to the Church of St Cuthbert. In the family and estate papers, you may find correspondence and legal documents concerning the ownership and succession of the landholding family, as well as genealogical information. You may also find records relating to those people who rented and worked on the land in rentals, leases, and records kept by the factor, the proprietor's estate manager and agent. Information relating to building on the estates, from the owner's castle or country house to farms, mills, and estate workers' cottages, can be found in these papers. Records relating to agriculture, forestry, and fishing, as well as industrial activities such as mining, may also be found in estate records. Aside from the private papers held by NRS, some collections have been deposited in the archives and libraries of local authorities and universities, or are held in private hands by private individuals and families, landed estates, clubs and societies, businesses and law firms. The National Register of Archives for Scotland, a department within NRS, holds surveys or lists of these collections, which can be viewed online or at NRS. They also give advice to owners of private archives on how to care and manage their collections. The Register House Plan Series, or RHP, is an artificial collection containing over 170,000 topographical maps and plans and architectural and engineering drawings from a wide variety of sources. Most drawings relate to other collections we hold, such as court or estate records. These can be useful for family and local history research and enhance the value of the visual material as historical evidence for buildings and places. A selection of these maps and plans are available to view via Scotland's People, but images of many more can be viewed at NRS. The 6th Earl of Mar was a talented amateur architect and landscape designer. Due to his involvement in the 1715 Jacobite rebellion, he was attainted for high treason, exiled, and his lands forfeited and his title extinguished. However, he continued to try to influence life in Scotland from his exile in France. This is one of his plans for his estate at Alloa in Clackmannanshire. Mar was very interested in economical and industrial developments to Alloa, and beneath the stylistic appearance of his plans, there is an underlying complex scheme for improving the infrastructure of the town. However, not all of NRS's plans are quite so grand, as is the case with this small pictorial sketch from the late 18th century of Lendrick Castle in Caledonian, Perthshire. NRS holds the Scottish records of the rail and canal systems, coal, gas, electricity, steel and shipbuilding industries. These include the archives of what used to be called British Rail and the companies that formed it. We also hold several private collections of railway papers. Staff records can be found within the railway company papers. Railway staff listed in these records are those who worked for the railway companies, not those who built the railways and who worked for contractors. If your ancestor worked for a railway company, you're more likely to find a record of his service if he worked in a station than if he was an engine driver or plate layer. You're also more likely to find him if he worked for the Caledonian Railway Company or the North British Railway Company, because more of their staff records have survived. The most useful staff records are those which give the date of birth and show the detailed career of each railwayman from job to place to place. This record shows that John Anderson, born the 15th of January 1866, started work for the Caledonian Railway Company as a porter at Erith in 1881 and gradually moved step by step until he completed his career in 1924 as a station master at Guthrie on a salary of £260 per year. Staff records also detail reprimands given for offences such as being drunk on duty, oversleeping or other misdemeanours. For example, Henry Glennie, who like John Anderson worked for the Caledonian Railway Company, was personally and severely cautioned for using foul language towards the wife of a trader. NRS also holds the largest written and pictorial archive of Scottish railway history, most notable of which are the photographs relating to the construction of the Forth Bridge in the late 19th century. This photograph shows the incomplete Forth Bridge from the northwest, with Fife Pier in the foreground and Inchgarvie and Queensferry beyond. Scotland had one of the world's largest and most successful shipbuilding industries until the late 20th century. The resulting historical records of shipbuilding are consequently voluminous, and they are cared for by several Scottish local and university archives, as well as NRS. In terms of photographic material, the principal collection held by NRS is that of John Brown's shipyard, which became part of the Upper Clyde Shipbuilders. NRS holds a collection of around 40,000 photographs, which date from the 1880s to 1980s. They document the construction and sea trials of ocean liners, passenger ships and warships at the John Brown shipyard at Clydebank on the west coast of Scotland. The photograph collection contains many famous ships, including the ocean liners RMS Lusitania and Queen Elizabeth II, the QE2, and battle cruisers HMS Tiger and HMS Hood. Over 1,000 images from the collection are available to consult and purchase from the ScotlandsPeople Image Library. In this photograph, we can see the ocean liner RMS Queen Mary on trial in 1936. For those records you're unable to access online, we will now look at the procedure for visiting the Historical Search Room at General Register House in Edinburgh. We are looking forward to welcoming you back to our buildings. We advise that you check the service status page on the NRS website for the most up-to-date notices relating to NRS on-site services or other important announcements. Before you visit, please read the Safe Visit Agreement and the Historical Search Room Guidance on the service status page. The agreement outlines the measures in place to ensure the safety of researchers. The guidance explains what you can expect during your visit and the range of services which are currently available from our search room. Consult the online NRS Catalogue and research guides. Contact the search room staff at lsrhe@scotlandspeople.gov.uk or via the Contact Us form on Scotland's People to arrange a visit and all the records you would like to consult. Access is by appointment only and all records must be requested in advance. Bring identification and 2 passport-size colour photographs to obtain a reader's ticket, and lastly, bring pencils and papers for conducting your research. Whilst conducting research in the search room, there are a few points to bear in mind when handling archives. Please ensure that your hands are clean and dry. Use only pencil when taking notes and do not mark the documents in any way. Take care opening the bundles and documents and handling the items inside, and keep the original order of the bundle. Use only acid-free bookmarks and do not use post-it notes as markers. And last but not least, please do not eat or drink near archives. We will now look at some useful online resources to help you with your research. NRS's website provides information on records relating to Scotland's people, places and history. On the home page, you can find links to the catalogues and indexes as well as the research guides. Each collection of records held by NRS has a catalogue or index to help you find the right material, whether it's a file or a single document. Most of the records we hold are described on an electronic database, the NRS Catalogue. The catalogue allows you to search descriptions of our records and is a good starting point for any research you wish to conduct. On the NRS Archives YouTube channel, there is a short tutorial which provides a brief introduction on how to use the NRS's online catalogue to search for records relating to your research or area of interest. The online research guides have been compiled by members of staff and provide useful information about some of our most popular record sets and how they can be accessed. Different topics covered in NRS's records are listed alphabetically. These guides are a good place to begin your research, as they not only provide instructions on how to search the records, they also often give suggested archive references, which are invaluable for searching the archive catalogue. On the NRS Archives YouTube channel, there is a short tutorial which provides a brief introduction on how to access the NRS research guides and how they can help with your research. If you are new to research using original records prior to the late 18th century, the Scottish Handwriting website provides practical online tuition to help improve your skills. Assistance is also provided in our guide on reading older handwriting and a glossary of abbreviations, words and phrases. You could also sign up for the University of Glasgow's Future Learn course on early modern Scottish paleography. The Dictionaries of the Scots Language is a culmination of 2 major dictionaries of the Scots language in a searchable format. The resource provides invaluable assistance with tracking down the meaning and historical origin of Scots words. This official guide to the records made available via NRS and Scotland's People is indispensable for family historians and biographers. The 7th edition is packed with up-to-date information about how to trace Scottish genealogy in the unique treasure trove of Scotland's National Archives. It is available for the first time in both paperback and e-book editions. You can purchase a copy from all good booksellers or online via the publisher Berlin and other retailers. You can find out more about family and historical research on Scotland's People, and you can keep up to date with news and events by subscribing to our newsletter and following Scotland's People on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching this talk. I hope you have found it useful for your research. If you have any questions after today, please do get in touch with us at education@nrscotland.gov.uk. Goodbye.